Hi everybody, it's Melinda Brown with Rogers County Literacy. Once again, we're going to do a lesson in citizenship. This will be our fourth video. And I'd like to say thanks to the Oklahoma Department of Libraries and the Institute of Museum and Library Services in Oklahoma City. And they provide the money for us to do these services for you, and we thank them very much. Today we're going to do the next 10 questions from citizenship, starting on number 30. And number 30 is, if the president can't serve, who would take his place? And I believe we've talked about this a little bit before. If the president can't serve, then the vice president would serve and be president. I think we talked about if the president got sick, or for some reason if he got sick and still couldn't serve. One of our presidents had a stroke at one point, and they weren't sure if he could serve, and if he couldn't, the vice president would have taken his place. Now, what if the president and the vice president couldn't serve? Then the next person in line is the Speaker of the House of Representatives. So we know who this is. And do you remember who this is? The president, of course, is Donald Trump. His vice president is Michael Pence. And the Speaker of the House of Representatives, is Nancy Pelosi. So if Donald Trump couldn't serve, Mike Pence would become president. And if Mike Pence couldn't serve, Nancy Pelosi would become president, but only until the next election. And in the next election, we would elect a new president or vice president. And it's also possible that the president, if he couldn't serve for just a short time, the vice president would take his place. And then if the president got well or was back in service, then the president would be the president again, because he is the elected official. So, these are names you need to know: Donald Trump, Mike Pence, Nancy Pelosi, President, Vice President, Speaker of the House, and that's the order in which they would assume the presidency if something would happen to these people. The next question says, who's the Commander-in-Chief of the military? Well, in one of our earlier videos, we said the President is the Commander-in-Chief. And as you can imagine, Commander-in-Chief, that sounds like military words. The President signs bills into law. The President is the head of the executive branch of the government, and he's also the Commander-in-Chief of the military. So the President has a lot of big duties to do. The next question is, who signs the bills into law? Well, we kind of have to go back to our original diagram. You'll see here we have Congress, and Congress writes the bill. They make the law. Congress makes the law. We call it a bill. But then they have to send it over to the president, and here it is on his desk waiting for him to sign it. So Congress makes the law. They call it a bill. They send it to the president for him to sign it. So the president signs bills. And then once the president has signed it, it is now not a bill. Now it's a law. So there's one question that says, who makes the laws? Well, the answer is Congress. Who signs the bills, which is the law before it's been signed? That's the president. And that's when it becomes an official law of the United States. Now, what if the president won't sign the bill? And that happens sometimes. Sometimes the president won't sign it. So if the president won't sign the bill, we say that the president vetoes the bill. So one of the questions is, who vetoes bills? And the veto power is given to the President of the United States. So once again, the President has many powers. So sometimes the President will not sign the bill. So here's the bill. And whenever he won't sign it, it does not become a law. So the word veto means the President will not sign it. So once again, the answer is, who vetoes bills? The answer is the President. The President has lots of power. Now, the next one is, what does the President's cabinet do? So here we have a cabinet like you put your dishes in. You think of putting all this stuff in the cabinet and taking it out when you need it. So when you need something and you're the President of the United States, probably what you need is some advice. And so the word cabinet is a group of people that should be experts in whatever they do. And when the President needs something from the cabinet, he can ask that person for some advice. Now, one important thing to know about the cabinet is they're not elected. These are people that the President can choose. And they can't vote in Congress. They can't sign bills like the President. Their job is just to advise the President. And we have quite a few of those, I believe 16. I couldn't get them all on here, but I got some of them on here. The President's cabinet, they're called secretaries. That's their special title. So somebody who is Secretary of Agriculture, we would call Mr. Secretary or Madam Secretary. And each one of these are secretaries of, and whatever their area is. So the Secretary of Agriculture would be a person who is an expert in farming, food, factories that produce food, knowing the best ways to grow food. The Secretary of Commerce means business, defense, education, energy, health and human services, homeland security, transportation, treasury. There are a few more. The question that you'll be asked will be to name 2 of the cabinet posts that the President would have. So I always think of, in my life, the really important things are education, transportation, treasury. But in your life, if you're a farmer, the first one you might think of is the Secretary of Agriculture. Or if you're a soldier, the first one you might think of is the Secretary of Defense. But you need to know 2 of them. So if I was asked name 2 of the President's cabinet posts, I would probably say education and transportation. But you may say 2 different ones. Now you'll notice over here I have written the Attorney General and the Vice President. Those are the only 2 individuals who are in the President's cabinet that don't have the word Secretary of in front of their name. The Attorney General is the country's lawyer, attorney. And of course, the Vice President serves as one of the President's main advisors. Also, if something would happen to the President, the Vice President would need to know what is going on with all these people. The President takes their advice, Let's say we need some reform in education. The Secretary of Education would give him some advice, and then maybe he would go to Congress and say, the Secretary of Education has told me this. Would you explore it and see if we need to make a new law about education? So these are the President's advisors, just advisors. They're not elected. The President picks them, and they give the President some good advice on what he needs to do in all these areas. Also, remember I said, hopefully these people are experts in their field. So we hope that the Secretary of Transportation would be an expert in knowing about roads and highways and all the different forms of transportation. We hope that the Secretary of Education has maybe been a teacher or a professor and involved in education and knows all the things that need to be addressed in education. Experts that help the President by advising him. The next question is, what does the judicial branch do? Well, we've talked about the three branches of government, and I drew the Congress and the White House a little bit smaller because this question is about the judicial branch. The judicial branch is our courts, our court system. And you know that we have courts of all different sizes, starting out with city courts and county courts, district courts, federal courts, and then the main, biggest, and best, and most important court in the whole land is the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is in Washington, D.C., and they are the final stopping place when somebody has a question about a law. So, what does the court system do? And the question is, name one thing that the court systems, the judicial branch of the government, one thing the judicial branch does. And you could answer with any of these things. They review the laws, they explain the laws, they resolve disputes, and they decide if the law is constitutional. Oh, going back to the Constitution, the supreme law of the land. So if something is found by the Supreme Court to not be constitutional, then that law is no longer a law. So sometimes Congress will write a bill, the President will sign it, it becomes law, and then you and I decide, wait a minute, this law doesn't seem right for us. So we would go to the courts and ask, would you please do these things and decide if this law is constitutional? If the court says it is, then it remains a law. If the court says no, it's not constitutional, it doesn't provide for the people of the United States to be a free people, then the law is struck down. So what does the judicial branch do? It does all these things. You just have to remember one. Reviews the laws, explains the laws, resolves disputes, or it decides if a law is constitutional. Any of those would be okay. The highest court in the land, as we just said, is the Supreme Court. And you'll notice that I have the number 9 there. The Supreme Court has 9 justices. And the justices are, that's just another word for judges. So the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. has 9 justices. And that's one of the questions. How many justices or judges are on the Supreme Court? And there are 9. And the reason there are 9, if they have to make a decision, they all vote to decide how the court is going to determine if it's a constitutional law or how they're going to resolve the dispute. And if there are 9, you won't ever have a tie. If there are only 8 justices and these 4 vote yes and these 4 vote no, you have a tie. So whatever the problem is doesn't get solved. But if you have 9, you might have a 5-4 decision, or you could have a 3-6 decision. Any different varying of those numbers, but at least you won't have a tie. You may remember last year the president appointed 1 extra Supreme Court justice because for a little while, due to the death of one of the justices, we only had 8. And that's not good when we only have 8. We need to have 9 so that we never have a tie. So there are 9 justices. And the boss of those 9 justices is John Roberts. He's called the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He's the boss of all the 9 justices. His name is actually John G. Roberts, Jr., but all you would need to know is John Roberts or Roberts. And he is the one that tells the other justices the schedule and what they're going to look at each year. But as far as his vote is just another vote, just like all the other justices. So you need to know this name, John Roberts. So now we've gone clear through number 40 in your 100 questions. And I wanted to remind you that you can go to USCIS.gov. And I wanted to also remind you to work on your English with Duolingo or whatever app that you use that helps you. I know that that you're all very busy, but if you can give yourself a little bit of time every day to work on your English, I think that will help. Also, USCIS.gov has those practice tests that we've done together, and I think that you'll find out that doing those over and over again will give you a lot of confidence in knowing these questions. Thank you so much. Thanks to the Oklahoma Department of Libraries. Thanks to the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And I'll see you next time. Thank you.